The United States nears a tragic milestone in the pandemic. Twitter fact checks President Trump for the first time, and it is a go for launch at Cape Canaveral. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Wednesday, May 27th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Good to see you again here on Living Color Video.
All right, let's get to the news. And unfortunately, the U.S. official coronavirus death toll will, in all likelihood, cross the 100,000 milestone today. This is according to Johns Hopkins University and their count. Almost exactly 5 months since that first cluster of a mysterious pneumonia-like disease was reported in Wuhan, China. More than 350,000 people around the world have died from this.
You know, it's kind of weird, right? Because we've been talking about this milestone for at least yesterday, and we knew it was coming. And it's there's this famous quote that's attributed to Stalin, right? That one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic, and it feels a bit like that with when we talk about this, to me at least. And I think one of the things that's been strangest and most unsettling of the last couple of months has been this feeling that there's really been sort of like a lack of collective mourning of our dead. Joe, we're talking about 33 9/11s in the last 3 months, sort of a crass way of thinking about this staggering toll. A lot of these people were older, but I don't think that makes it less tragic. I think it makes it in some ways more so, right? Given how many of these people died alone and probably very scared in the hospital, unable to see anybody. But Jill, if you told me in January when we were doing this podcast and we were talking about the brush fires in Australia and the fact that we looked like we were going to war with Iran, if you told me that 100,000 of our fellow citizens would be dead before June from this, I would think that you were crazy, right? I wouldn't even believe it. And yet here we are. So it's just remarkable, and I think that everyone should just take a moment today to try and process it, right?
Lester Holt on NBC News said last night, it's like we're living the stages of grief all at once: denial, anger, bargaining, despair, and perhaps even acceptance. Is it possible that we've come to accept 100,000 deaths, or are we simply unable to process it? It's all just so horrible.
Yeah,
I agree with that. A major development, though, that really caught my eye last night, the CDC has some new guidelines on its website warning that antibody tests could be wrong up to half the time. And therefore, they are not accurate enough to base policy decisions off of, which, of course, is the whole point of the tests, to see how many people have some kind of immunity to the virus in the hopes that more people can go back to work, school, etc. 50%, Carlo. That's crazy.
I got one. It is. I got one of these tests yesterday. Actually, I went. They were giving them. The city had teamed up with this private company to give these tests in Brooklyn. I actually had an amazing, really great experience. As great as an experience of giving blood can be, I guess. But it was super quick, super easy. They were great. They said they've been doing 800 of these a day. Now the people there said that the tests are accurate. I mean, of course, who knows, what that means. I actually spoke to the head of a blood collection nonprofit yesterday as part of this show that we do on Wednesdays. And he told me that the IV tests are pretty good. He says that the pinpricks are giving off the false positives. But again, that's not necessarily what the CDC says. So I don't even really know what to make of it. I mean, I think that if you have the opportunity to get an antibody test, you probably should, right? It can't hurt to get those results. But I guess what this is saying is you may need to be tested a couple of times to be sure, whether or not you're carrying these antibodies. There's still just so much we don't know. It's frustrating, right?
50% is unacceptable. 50% means that's flipping a coin. 50%, I don't understand. That means it's not valid, that you don't need it, because it could be right as much as it could be wrong.
It's still unclear to me
I
on
don't
the
get
CDC
it.
site if they're talking about a specific test, the pinprick versus the this other assay that they do, the IV test. I don't know. I got to look into this a little bit more. But I
But the
feel you.
whole
I mean,
point,
yeah, if it's
and I'm sorry to interrupt. The whole point of it is that if you get an antibody test, the whole idea is that a lot of people have been potentially exposed to this virus, didn't even know it. Maybe they had a sore throat and a fever for a day back in February, and oh wait, that was it, or they were just totally asymptomatic, um, and it would hence produce antibodies. But and the idea would be that if you have the antibodies, you think you have immunity, and you feel comfortable going out and going back into the office, maybe eating at a restaurant, it changes your behavior. A 50%
right.
inaccuracy rate is totally unacceptable. Like, then stop doing the test until you can get it down. I mean, I have to obviously look into the numbers to your point and figure it out. But if that's the warning, then I think that's dangerous, actually.
No, for sure.
If you're
Yeah. No, I get that.
giving,
If I think what's dangerous is if you're taking that test, you're assuming that it's going to be, perfectly accurate, and then you go out in the world assuming you have these antibodies and you don't, right?
But what I'm saying is 50%, 15%, you could say, all right, maybe you do two of them and you up it to, 90% accuracy or whatever. But 50%, that's basically, I don't know. That's, to me, just seems, why bother? But all right,
Right.
let's move on. On the issue of immunity, we did mean to mention the story yesterday. So Sweden have totally did something different than most countries. They kind of, it's a closely watched experiment where they basically allowed their country to build up herd immunity to the virus, and they didn't drastically lock down or curtail the economy. So far, at least not yet. But it's not producing the expected results. Swedish officials were hoping that the level of herd immunity would reach the 60% threshold by the end of the month. They say that is not even close to happening.
In
So
Stockholm, yeah,
interesting to
that's
watch what's going there. What's going on in Sweden?
well, they now have the highest mortality rate in all of Europe. So I mean, I think if there's a lesson here, it's probably for the folks who said that we should just follow Sweden's lead, not do any lockdowns and just kind of let this thing infect people and, only, establish some of this herd immunity. But yeah, this is definitely worth watching because this was a big test, and it sure looks like Sweden failed it. To be honest with you, I mean, their chart is like, um, if you look at the charts of their cases versus the rest of Europe now, they're on like another level.
I wonder if there is a second wave there, if if they're going to do it differently. But I guess
You
time
have
will
to
tell.
think, yeah.
Also, some non-COVID news today, as we've been reporting this week, a huge milestone in the history of human spaceflight. NASA astronauts are going to lift off from American soil for the first time since 2011, and for the first time ever aboard a private company's spacecraft. Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are finishing up their last night in quarantine ahead of the mission. It is a short hop to the ISS, but it is a point of pride for NASA after having to hitch a ride into orbit with the Russians for the last 9 years.
It is. I think this is going to be. I mean, I said it yesterday. I think this is going to be really cool to watch. The president and vice president will both be in attendance. So a little bit of trivia here. President Trump will become the third president to witness a live space launch. The others being Nixon and Clinton. Which, when you think about it, is funny because those are the other two presidents to either resign or be impeached. But I don't know what that. I don't think that has any meaning. It's just sort of interesting. But it looks like there's a slight chance that they're going to have to scrub this thing due to weather. There's thunderstorms in the area, but they're saying as of now it's a go for launch. Cheddar is going to broadcast the launch live 4:33 Eastern time this afternoon. I'm sure every other network will have it too. So take a moment in your day to watch it. This is going to be if all goes according to plan, this is going to be a great moment in the history of this country.
Awesome. I'm excited. Some big developments over at Twitter when it comes to President Trump's Twitter account. The social media site has now started to fact check the president's tweets in real time. And it follows this really, it's such a sad story, actually. So Twitter had to apologize to the widower of a woman who died many years ago, and that death has been used by President Trump to smear MSNBC host Joe Scarborough. Twitter is saying that it is not going to remove the president's tweets about it, even after this widower wrote this letter begging the company to take them down. He actually wrote this letter to CEO Jack Dorsey, and Twitter says that the tweets don't violate the site's term of service.
So yeah, this is almost like it's like a single story, but it's also two stories, right? So
Yeah.
they're fact checking these tweets. They just so if you look at the president's Twitter account, there's now a prompt to get the facts about mail-in ballots attached to a tweet storm that he did last night, where he called mail-in voting fraudulent. So this is the first time that they're doing these little fact check icons. I mean, look, it doesn't really. I don't think it really matters in the sense that people aren't going to believe. People believe what they believe at this point. It's good. I support it. But you got to remember something when it comes to the president and Twitter, right? Donald Trump is the single best thing to ever happen to Twitter. That's no exaggeration. They're not going to deplatform him. It's just not going to happen, nor should it, in my opinion. But taking down tweets that are obviously in violation of the terms of service, which these ones are. I mean, make no mistake. Like if you or I tweeted something like this, where we were, smearing somebody, calling them a murderer, we would be, our accounts would be taken down. But it's very hard. It's very hard to do this when you're talking about the most powerful person on earth. The bigger question I think we got to ask is just like, where's the sense of common decency? Putting aside the fact that we're in this just massive public health crisis and just mourning the loss of all of these people. Like what if you were acting, Jill, if you were acting like this, I would, first of all, you'd be fired, you'd have your account banned, and you deserve it, as would I, right? If I was doing this, I would hope that you or one of my family members would call me and say, Carlo, what are you doing, man? Like, get it together. You can't act like this online. You'd be worried about somebody in your life, if they were doing stuff like this on the internet, smearing people for, accusing them of murder. And it's just so upsetting. I don't know what else to say about it.
Some additional non-COVID news that is now turning into a major boiling point when it comes to race in this country. The FBI is now investigating an incident in Minneapolis. A white police officer was recorded on video using his knee to pin down a black man who was already in custody, who was repeatedly shouting, "I can't breathe." That man, George Floyd, died shortly afterward. The city has fired 4 officers that were involved in the incident, and the Minnesota governor says it is, quote, sickening.
So there were some protests. Yeah, there were some protests last night that got a little bit violent in the streets of Minneapolis, which I think is to be expected. An important part of this particular incident, there's so many of these horrible stories these days, but an important part of this one is the police report. When they file a police report when this incident took place, when they arrested this guy, George Floyd, they didn't mention any of this. It was a very sort of anodyne, they were approaching a forgery suspect and he was in medical duress. They didn't happen to mention that there was one of them was pinning down the back of his head while he was on the ground. If it weren't for the fact that a bystander was shooting this all on their cell phones, that would probably be the end of it. We never would have heard any of this. We never would have seen any of it. And, it just makes you wonder, like, how, in the days before cell phone cameras, how many people, how many black people, how many black men in this country died in an altercation with cops like this, in which the police just sort of marked it down that they were resisting arrest, which is what happened here. The video is really outrageous if you haven't seen it. The guy was not resisting arrest. They say he was, and maybe at one point he was, but he's clearly in serious duress because this cop is on top of him. So yeah, it's upsetting story, and it's going to be a big flashpoint. I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on. But yeah,
it's
upsetting
horrible
stuff all around. Yeah.
And in terms of just this idea of wanting to protest it, it just becomes so complicated because of the times that we're living in terms of gathering with a mass number of people.
Yeah,
Um,
hard to socially distance when you're, protesting in the streets.
I do want to mention really quickly this tech and business story. There is a major new player joining the streaming wars today. It's AT&T's HBO Max service launching with everything that is on HBO, plus some exclusive content from Warner Media and DC Comics. And if you've already subscribed to HBO in some form of another, it's a bit tricky to find out if you're eligible for a free upgrade. Um,
So
right?
it is, and it's confusing. And rather than explain it here, I linked to a really good guide from CNET in the Need2Know newsletter today that helps explain it based, whether you get HBO from your cable provider or whether you get HBO Go or HBO Now. But this is HBO Max is probably the biggest Netflix competitor now, just in terms of content and prestige and scale. It's also the most expensive, which is going to be interesting to see if people cough up for it if they don't already pay for HBO. A lot of people aren't trying to spend unnecessary money on discretionary purchases right now, which I think that this would fall into. But the whole streaming situation, Jill, I don't know how many times I've complained about this, but it's just completely out of control. Like I cannot find anything. The menus are incoherent. I don't know where anything is. I never thought I'd say it, but I yearn for the days of my Time Warner cable box and the DVR, and that's where I watch TV on.
I have that. I'm at my in-laws, and we have a cable with a DVR, and I have to tell you, it's wonderful. I watch it.
Remember when
That's
DVR
what I
was
watch, and it's amazing. I DVR
DV,
everything. I love it.
DVR was the greatest. DVR to me is one of the greatest inventions. When that came out, you were just hold on, you're telling me I can just record this show? I don't have to sit in front of my TV at 8 o'clock on Tuesdays to watch it. That was such a game changer.
I mean, imagine what a VCR was when that first came out.
Yeah, true.
Okay, sports. The NHL, now the largest U.S. sports league to make definitive plans for a return to play, will be sometime after July 1st. The top 24 teams in the league will play a round-robin playoff series in one of two hub cities, which are yet to be determined, and only 50 members of each team's personnel will be allowed to travel.
So I have a new stance on sports. Do you want it?
Okay,
Want me
let's
to tell
hear
you?
it. Yes.
So I think that if you're not Major League Baseball, I don't think you should bother. I think you should just cut your losses at this point. All of this production
You're talking football, basketball.
Yeah, I mean
All
football.
sports?
Football, I don't know because we're not. It's too hard to know what things are going to look like in the fall. But I think basically if you're the NBA or the NHL and you were basically in the middle of your season and you had to cancel it, just cut your losses. You're going through all of this production for a shortened hockey season or a shortened NBA playoffs. The athletes are going to be out of shape. There's all of this risk from a public health perspective. I just think it's not worth it. Baseball, though, I think they do have to figure out because I think it's just so much part of the country's fabric. It's so much a part of the summer. I think it would just be too weird to have a summer with no baseball, and people really need it. I think so. Maybe I'm biased, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it on sports.
Well, not only that, but baseball seems to be one of the sports that you could pretty easily figure out a way to social distance.
It's by far it's by far the best, the best one to do in these times, I think.
Yeah, golf, maybe tennis, except for the ball, but golf, tennis, baseball.
Baseball's the
there
real
are sports that it's okay.
Yeah, we need some baseball. That's it. We just need some baseball games on. I don't care about hockey.
Carlo, let's end on some good news. What do you have?
So New Zealand, which is my my favorite prime minister, they just announced that they no longer have any patients in the hospital for coronavirus. 5 straight days, no new cases. It's just remarkable. Jacinda Ardern has been a real leader and just it's just a remarkable story what's going on in that country and how they've handled this. And there's definitely lessons to be learned when the history of all this is written.
100%. Did you happen to catch, she was doing a Facebook Live or an interview with somebody and there was an earthquake and she was just like, oh wait,
Whoops.
There's a bit of an earthquake, and just kept on going.
She was like, oh, bit of a shake there. Amazing. I love it.
Yeah, she's It's definitely one to watch. My
Yeah.
good news story is from here in New York City. This is an incredible story that has now made me cry more times than I want to admit. So, a
Oh, wow.
nurse from Virginia who came to New York City to help with coronavirus reunited with the New York City firefighter who pulled her from a burning building 37 years ago. Her name is Deirdre Taylor. Her family left the city after the fire. So the Daily News has this whole account. She thought she would never get to thank this man for saving her life. And he literally saved her life. He pulled her out of a building. She was unconscious. He had to give her not full CPR, but had to resuscitate her. So she had basically had just a picture of him, from the cover of a newspaper, and
Yeah.
that was how she was trying to figure it out for all these years. She never really thought she'd get to thank him. His name is Eugene. You have to help me with this again, Carlo. What's the Pugliese?
Pugliese? Pugliese.
Pugliese. So basically, she had this picture of the Daily News front page. She'd been trying for years to track him down, and she feared that perhaps he died in 9/11. That was her big concern. But just fast forward, she comes to the U.S. It's not the U.S. She comes to New York to help with coronavirus, and she was at the hospital. She was at NYU Langone, and this does not end with him being a patient there, by the way. Basically, it was after one of her shifts. Firefighters had brought pizza for the healthcare workers on the front lines of this thing. She followed one of them out to an ambulance and explained what was going on. And turned out this firefighter that she had met knew who had rescued her,
Oh, wow.
because it was a really well-known story. And you have to just look this up. He has the picture of he has the cover of that picture on his wall.
Yeah.
He's a diehard Yankees fan. He basically said, he would not have been happier if he got a call from Derek Jeter. He told her, "You've been on my wall for 25 years." And they just, were able to reconnect. He told her exactly what happened. He said, "I didn't even have gear on. I had a helmet and an axe. We took an elevator up, went to the floor below where the fire was. We went upstairs. The hallway was pretty well charged. There was a lot of smoke." He said he entered the fourth floor. The woman was trapped with her 4-year-old daughter. He took a breath of fresh air from the open window, found the mother, pulled her to another room. She was yelling, "My baby, my baby." He went back in, crawled through smoke and flames, and pulled out the unconscious girl, gave her 2 quick breaths. She started crying, which is a good sign, and they were able to save her. I just,
Incredible. I'm
absolutely
looking at
incredible.
the story on the Daily News site. It's incredible. I love it. Good choice today.
Yeah, thank you. I probably could have condensed it a little, but I just felt like the whole thing was really incredible.
That's great.
Okay, Carlo, again, nice seeing you in living color. And for everyone out there, thanks for listening. That is what you need to know for Wednesday, May 27th.
See you tomorrow, folks.